I never thought a casual hello from my neighbor could make my heart race, until she smiled and whispered, "Boys like you are my guilty pleasure." It was a late Saturday morning when I first really noticed her, not just noticed, but felt that quiet tug of curiosity you don't easily shake off. I was carrying a box of groceries up the hallway to my apartment when the door across from mine creaked open. She stepped out, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the soft sway of her movements. She was the kind of woman who carried herself like she belonged to every room she entered, not in arrogance, but in a natural, graceful confidence. I caught the sunlight hitting her hair, strands of dark brown gleaming with hints of chestnut, and for a split second, it looked like it was catching fire. She had that easy smile that made strangers feel like old friends, warm but guarded at the same time. "Hi," I said, fumbling with the box in my hands. Her eyes, deep, expressive, and somehow knowing, met mine. There was a flicker in them, a spark of amusement, maybe curiosity. "Hi," she replied, her voice smooth, calm, and just slightly teasing. That small inflection, it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I shifted the box to get a better grip, and our hands brushed. It was brief, accidental, but I felt it, the tiniest jolt of contact that made the air around me feel charged. She didn't pull away, not immediately. Instead, her lips curved in that faint, knowing smile that suggested she noticed it too. I cleared my throat and tried to focus on the box. I'm your neighbor," I said awkwardly, though I knew she already knew. "Yes," she said, eyes twinkling, "I've seen you around." There was a pause, and I realized she was studying me just as intently as I was studying her. I found myself wondering what she saw, a young man trying not to appear flustered, maybe, or someone who was genuinely curious about the quiet lives around him. There was a subtle elegance in how she moved, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her fingers lingered on the doorframe before she stepped aside to let me pass. It was hypnotic in the smallest, most mundane way, a gentle invitation to notice, to linger, without a word. I felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of the warmth in your palms and the quickening of your heartbeat. I wanted to speak, to say something witty or memorable, but all I could manage was a polite, "Nice to meet you," hoping it sounded casual, even though my voice betrayed me with a slight shake. She laughed softly, a sound that was quiet yet impossible to ignore. "Likewise," she said. And just like that, she disappeared into her apartment, leaving the hallway feeling smaller, quieter, and somehow incomplete. I leaned against the wall, gripping the box a little too tightly, my mind replaying every glance, every movement, every subtle signal I might have missed. That moment, the first brush of hands, the quiet spark in her smile, was nothing in the world, yet it left an impression I couldn't shake. I didn't know it then, but something had started, small and unspoken, that would quietly grow into a bond one never saw coming. And in that brief, ordinary Saturday morning, I realized that sometimes, curiosity doesn't ask for permission, it simply finds you, lingers, and refuses to let go. After that first encounter in the hallway, our interactions became small rituals without either of us intending it. I'd notice her when I checked my mail, a fleeting smile as she passed by carrying a cup of coffee. Sometimes she'd pause on the stairs, and we'd exchange a few words about the weather, a package delivery, or something as mundane as the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. It was during one of those casual mornings that I truly felt the subtle pull between us. I had spilled some coffee from my thermos while juggling groceries, and she appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Here, let me help," she said, her tone soft, patient, yet playful. Her fingers brushed mine as she steadied the cup, and that simple contact sent a ripple of warmth up my arm. We laughed at the clumsiness of the moment, and in that shared amusement, there was a strange sense of intimacy forming. I noticed the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the hint of rose in her cheeks, and the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the morning air. Everything about her drew me in, subtle gestures, quiet confidence, and the kind of presence that made time slow down when she was near. "Seems like you have a talent for making ordinary mornings chaotic," she teased lightly, her voice carrying a melodic ease that made me feel both exposed and comforted. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but my heart betrayed me, beating a little faster than usual. Over the next few weeks, our casual conversations began to stretch longer, lingering over topics we hadn't expected to share with neighbors. She spoke of small joys and quiet frustrations, of books she had read late at night, of walks she enjoyed alone in the park. I found myself listening intently, asking questions, and sharing details about my own life that I usually reserved for friends I'd known for years. There was an unspoken awareness of the age gap between us, yet it never felt like a barrier. Instead, it was like a subtle undercurrent beneath our words, a hint of tension that made each glance, each brush of hands, feel loaded with quiet meaning. One evening, we found ourselves standing close on her balcony, looking out at the city lights. The space between us was minimal, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her presence. She reached out almost instinctively to adjust the strap of my backpack, and our fingers touched. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it lingered long enough to make the air feel heavy with unspoken thoughts. Her gaze met mine, calm yet searching, and I caught a flicker of something I didn't fully understand, perhaps curiosity, perhaps desire, perhaps both. My own heartbeat seemed louder than usual, echoing in my chest as I struggled to maintain casual composure. Those small, lingering moments, the shared laughter, the accidental touches, the way our conversations stretched beyond necessity, were subtle, almost invisible to the world outside. But to us, they were everything. Each encounter pulled us closer, laying the groundwork for something neither of us could yet name, but both of us could feel. And in that slow unfolding of mornings, conversations, and quiet, shared moments, the ordinary became charged with possibility. Every glance held a question. Every smile carried a promise. And neither of us wanted to break the rhythm we had only just begun to discover. A tea started as a routine chat on a quiet evening, the kind that feels ordinary but ends up leaving its mark. I had come home after a long day at work, my mind cluttered with deadlines and responsibilities, when I saw her sitting on her balcony, sipping tea as the golden light of dusk spilled over the city. I lingered at my door, hesitant to disturb her, when she waved me over with a smile that was soft and inviting. I joined her, carrying a cup of coffee I hadn't touched yet, and we fell into our familiar rhythm, small talk about the day, the hum of distant traffic, the subtle scent of jasmine drifting from her balcony garden. But this time, there was a different weight in the air. She seemed quieter than usual, and I sensed an unspoken hesitation in her movements. After a pause, she spoke, her voice low, carrying a mix of resignation and vulnerability I hadn't heard before. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices," she admitted, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Divorce, it changes everything. You think you're ready to start again, but then you realize how much you've lost, and how much of yourself you've hidden away." Her words struck me, not just for their honesty, but for the quiet courage behind them. I leaned slightly closer, careful to respect the space between us, and offered the only thing I could, attentive presence. "It's not easy," I said softly. "But maybe it's not about what you've lost, it's about what you're discovering now." She glanced at me then, and there it was, the flicker of surprise, of recognition, that someone actually saw her. I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers toyed with the rim of her teacup, the small sigh that escaped her lips. It made me aware of my own vulnerability, of how deeply I felt for someone I barely knew, and how startlingly easy it was to care. I shared a little of my own life, stories I rarely tell anyone, about mistakes I'd made, lessons I'd learned, and the small ways I tried to navigate the world. The conversation felt like a delicate dance, one of giving and receiving, of revealing and observing. Every glance held weight, every gesture conveyed more than words ever could. At one point, she reached out to adjust my sleeve, her fingers brushing against my wrist, lingering just a heartbeat too long. The warmth of her touch, the quiet steadiness of her hand, made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something, to reach back, but all I could manage was to let the moment exist, unspoken and meaningful in its silence. We sat there for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed irrelevant, watching the sky darken into night. There was no rush, no urgency, just the two of us, talking, listening, and understanding. I realized then that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a bridge. And with every word she shared, every subtle gesture, the bridge between us grew stronger. By the time I left her balcony, the air had shifted. There was a quiet intimacy now, unforced, unspoken, that hummed between us. A lingering touch, a shared look, a small smile, they all carried a promise that this connection, fragile and tentative, had room to grow. And I knew, without fully understanding why, that our lives had quietly intertwined, in ways neither of us could ignore. The first time she teased me deliberately, I didn't know whether to be flustered or flattered. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I had gone over to her apartment to return a book she'd lent me, a small excuse, really, to see her again. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her sleeves rolled up, sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating the faint highlights in her hair. "Back so soon?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as I handed her the book. There was a playful curve to her lips, the kind that suggested she enjoyed watching me squirm just a little. "I finished it," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me with a slight shake. "Already," she teased, taking the book from my hands and flipping it closed with deliberate slowness. "You read fast, or maybe you just wanted an excuse to come see me again." My stomach twisted. There was no doubt in my mind that she knew the effect she had on me. I tried to laugh it off, but the warmth spreading through my chest refused to be ignored. We moved to the small balcony, carrying coffee mugs that steamed in the soft afternoon light. I noticed her eyes lingering on me as she leaned against the railing, fingers brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. There was a subtle shift in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that neither of us could fully ignore, the attraction simmering beneath the surface, unspoken but undeniable. "I guess," I said cautiously, "I just enjoy talking to you." Her smile softened, and she stepped a little closer, narrowing the space between us. "I enjoy talking to you too," she said, her tone calm but teasing, more than I probably should. Her words hit me in a way that was equal parts thrilling and forbidden. The awareness of the age difference, of the unspoken boundaries society might impose, added attention to every glance and gesture. And yet, in that moment, I felt a strange freedom, an intimacy built not on grand gestures, but on the subtle electricity of our shared attention. We lingered near the railing, watching the city move below us. Our shoulders brushed occasionally, just enough to make me conscious of the warmth she radiated. When she reached for her coffee mug, our hands met briefly. The contact wasn't dramatic, but the lingering warmth of her fingers made my pulse quicken. I wanted to withdraw, to act casual, but I found myself holding the brush a fraction longer than necessary, reveling in the quiet tension. "Careful," she said softly, eyes twinkling with mischief. "You're making me feel responsible for your heart now." I laughed nervously, feeling the truth of it in the back of my mind. Every subtle touch, every teasing remark, every prolonged look was weaving a quiet web between us, a web that felt impossible to ignore. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I realized that our relationship had shifted. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were two people discovering a delicate, thrilling, forbidden connection, a slow-burning attraction that promised more than either of us could articulate, but neither of us wanted to stop exploring. And in that soft, teasing light, every glance, every touch, every word became a promise of possibility, one we both felt but neither dared to name aloud. The days after our balcony conversation lingered in my mind like a persistent echo. Every word, every brush of hands, every teasing glance replayed endlessly, and I couldn't shake the tension that had quietly settled between us. I knew I was drawn to her, but the weight of the age gap, of societal judgment, and of my own uncertainty made me hesitate. It was late one evening when the moment arrived, unexpected, subtle, and somehow inevitable. I had been helping her carry groceries from the lobby up to her apartment. The hall was dimly lit, and a quiet tension had settled over us as we moved in step, shoulders brushing more often than necessary. There was a brief pause when we reached her door, and our hands lingered on the box together. "Thanks," she said softly, her voice carrying more warmth than usual. "I appreciate your help." Her eyes held mine for a beat longer than necessary, and I felt my pulse spike. The air between us felt heavier, charged with a quiet urgency neither of us wanted to name. I wanted to speak, to explain how I felt, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, letting my fingers graze hers in that fleeting, electrifying moment. After stepping inside, we sat on opposite ends of the sofa under the soft glow of the living room lamp. Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was deliberate, filled with anticipation. I could feel the warmth of her presence across the space, the subtle scent of her perfume, and the faint rustle of her clothing as she shifted. Every movement seemed amplified, every glance weighted with unspoken meaning. She began, then paused, clearly wrestling with her thoughts. "I shouldn't feel this way. I know it's complicated." I swallowed hard, my own hesitation mirrored in her words. "I know," I admitted quietly. "I keep thinking about it, about you. And I don't know if I should." There it was, the truth laid bare, delicate yet undeniable. We were both caught between desire and restraint, curiosity and caution. The thought of crossing boundaries made my chest tighten, yet I couldn't deny the pull that had been growing since our first accidental touch in the hallway. Our conversation drifted to mundane topics, a deliberate shield to mask the tension, but even that couldn't erase the quiet closeness that had formed. At one point, I reached instinctively to adjust a cushion behind her back, and our fingers brushed. That brief, fleeting contact sent a ripple through me, a reminder of the fine line we were walking, between neighborly kindness and something more. Time seemed to stretch as we sat together, each lost in our own thoughts yet acutely aware of the other. I wanted to ask her to stay, to linger in the moment, but fear held my words hostage. She, too, seemed caught in her own hesitation, glancing away just long enough to mask the longing in her eyes. When I finally left, the hall felt colder than usual, empty without the warmth of her presence. And yet, the memory of that evening, the accidental touches, the shared glances, the unspoken confessions, remained with me, pressing insistently against the walls of my mind. We were no longer just neighbors. We were two people teetering on the edge of something profound, drawn together by curiosity, attraction, and the quiet intensity of unspoken desire. And in that delicate tension, I realized, hesitation didn't diminish the connection, it made it impossible to ignore. It was raining lightly that evening, the kind of soft drizzle that makes the city feel smaller, more intimate. I had been walking home when I saw her standing under the shared awning of our building, the rain misting the edges of her hair and glistening on her coat. I instinctively slowed, caught between wanting to run away from the intensity one felt and wanting to stay, drawn by the quiet magnetism she exuded. "You got caught in the rain?" I asked, stepping closer under the shelter, careful not to invade her space. She laughed softly, a sound that warmed me more than any heater could. I didn't mind. I like the rain. Her voice carried a vulnerability that made my chest tighten, and for a moment, I simply admired the way she held herself, graceful, composed, yet quietly fragile. We stood side by side, the drizzle forming tiny rivulets along the edges of the awning, and the world beyond felt distant and unimportant. I noticed how her fingers twitched as she held her coat together, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes met mine and lingered just a second too long. Every subtle gesture spoke volumes that words had yet to capture. "I need to be honest," she said suddenly, her tone soft but resolute. My heart skipped a beat, sensing the weight behind her words. She paused, inhaling sharply, then met my gaze fully. I'm drawn to you. More than I should be, maybe. And it scares me." Her confession hung in the air between us, fragile and trembling, yet undeniable. I felt my own pulse echoing in my ears, a mix of relief, fear, and something far deeper, something I had been trying to deny. "I feel the same," I whispered, almost without thinking. "I can't stop thinking about you. About us." There was a pause, and then she reached for my hand, her fingers brushing against mine with a gentle insistence. The warmth of her touch spread through me like sunlight breaking through clouds, and I instinctively held her hand back, careful yet eager, letting the connection linger. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to make the world shrink to just the two of us, standing under the soft drizzle. She started again, voice trembling slightly, "I've never felt this with anyone. Not like this." Her thumb brushed my palm, a tender, grounding motion that spoke of trust and courage. "I know," I said quietly. "I've felt it too. And I don't want to ignore it anymore." We stood in silence then, letting the rain and the quiet intimacy surround us. There was no rush, no need for grand declarations, just the simple, undeniable truth that we had found each other, in this improbable, delicate way. I felt her warmth, heard the quiet catch in her breath, and understood that some connections couldn't be denied or rationalized, they could only be felt. Finally, she leaned in slightly, her head tilting toward mine, not a kiss, but the promise of one. A soft exhale, a shared glance, a lingering brush of fingers, it was everything unspoken, yet fully understood. In that moment, The world seemed to pause, holding space for the quiet, thrilling confirmation of feelings neither of us could contain any longer. And for the first time, I realized that what we had, delicate, forbidden, and wholly real, was worth stepping into, together, with courage, honesty, and the slow-burning promise of something extraordinary. The following weeks felt like a delicate dance between anticipation and comfort. We had admitted our feelings, but the world hadn't changed around us. The hallways were still quiet, the city outside still buzzing with indifference. Yet, inside our shared moments, everything felt different. Every glance, every lingering hand touch, every subtle brush of arms carried a weight and warmth that hadn't existed before. One evening, she invited me over for tea. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and fresh flowers, the kind of subtle comfort that made me immediately feel at home. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, a cozy sweater draping her shoulders, her hair catching the lamplight in gentle waves. I noticed how at ease she seemed, yet her eyes held that same flicker of vulnerability, reminding me of how far we had come in such a short time. We talked about everything and nothing, work, books, little annoyances, dreams we hadn't spoken aloud. But more than conversation, there was a quiet rhythm to our proximity. I sat close enough that our knees almost touched, and when I shifted slightly, our shoulders brushed. I felt her warmth radiate toward me, and I caught her subtle intake of breath. "I like this," she said softly, her fingers grazing mine accidentally, or perhaps not, across the table. "I like the way we can just exist together, without the world pressuring us." I smiled, heart pounding at the intensity of the simplicity. "Me too," I admitted. "It's rare to feel this, safe and understood with someone." The evening stretched on, filled with laughter, comfortable silences, and small gestures that had become profoundly meaningful. At one point, she rested her head briefly on my shoulder, a fleeting contact that spoke volumes. My hand instinctively found hers, fingers entwining as if they had always belonged together. There was no rush, no need for dramatic declarations, just the quiet affirmation that we had chosen to be present for each other. For the first time, the age gap felt irrelevant. What mattered wasn't the numbers, the judgments, or the expectations, it was the bond we had cultivated, a slow, deliberate intimacy built on trust, vulnerability, and a shared willingness to lean into something uncertain yet beautiful. As the night drew to a close, we moved to the balcony to watch the city lights shimmer under the soft glow of street lamps. She leaned slightly against me, our hands still intertwined. The gentle brush of her fingers, the warmth of her presence, and the faint scent of her perfume made the moment feel suspended in time. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, "but I know I don't want to face it without you." I tightened my grip gently, my voice low and certain. "Then we'll face it together. No matter what." And in that quiet, unassuming moment, everything settled into a perfect equilibrium, hearts aligned, fears softened, and unspoken promises held firmly in our shared warmth. The story of our slow-burn connection had found its resolution, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the subtle, enduring intimacy of trust, affection, and mutual understanding. We stood there for a long time, hand in hand, letting the night, the city, and the quiet satisfaction of emotional truth envelop us. Whatever came next, we had each other, and that was enough.